where do we begin? Let's start with looking at what law is and the different ways we might be able to classify law. This can be a little bit confusing, so you might have to go over it a couple of times. Once you've got it though, it's fairly simple, the ideas, and we're going to concentrate on the broad classification systems because they have different implications both for how the law operates and what you might need to do in business. So let's start by looking at what law is. So most definitions of law involve three key concepts. It's a set of rules made by the state or the government, and it's enforceable by prosecution or litigation. So it's really important because there's lots of things that have rules. For instance, games have rules, but they're not law in the sense of our legal system. Second, these set of rules must be made by the government. And third, they're enforceable. They're enforceable by prosecution, which means the state can enforce them, or by litigation, which actually means people can enforce their rights against other people, right? Contract, defamation, okay? So it's not just about what the state can do, it also gives rights and responsibilities to people. So they're the three elements of law. It's a set of rules made by the state, enforceable by prosecution or litigation. And of course, business law is the set of rules regulating businesses and business activities. It's also really important to recognize that our legal system is very important to business and economic development. It's foundational to markets and a market economy because without a rule of law, the bargains in a market, etc., can't be enforced. So really, as it's got here, the rule of law is part of the software that's needed to operate the hardware of business. The legal system that we have matters a lot to the economic development of a country, to the well-being of people, and their ability to operate in business. So law is actually fundamental to business and our way of life. So that's generally what law is, but what should law try to be? What is an ideal law? And here are four key attributes that a good law aims to satisfy. The first attribute we have is certainty. And that just means we should know what the law is. If people don't know what the law is, they don't know what they should do or not do. So we should be certain about the law. Second, a good law is flexible, right? It changes in response to things like society attitudes. It might change as technology changes, etc. So the law has to be flexible. The third aspect is the law needs to be accessible, right? So people need to be able to find it. I mean, otherwise, how would you know what you should do? So good law is accessible. And of course, good law should be fair. It should treat people the same. Okay. So ideally, we want a legal system with certainty, flexibility, accessibility, and fairness. Now, obviously, it's hard to simultaneously achieve these four things. And under any legal system, we're going to have challenges around reaching them all the time. But as we go through, we might come back to a few of these principles and explain how the Australian legal system, particularly our common law system, tries to meet these four elements. Of course, law does more than just allow us to operate business. It has a whole lot of positive implications for society. It allows us, really importantly, to resolve disputes, and particularly resolve disputes without violence. Because one of the things we find is when we don't have a rule of law, people have to take it on themselves to enforce what they believe are their rights. and we often see that that will end as violence, violence between individuals. Because it does that, it helps us maintain social order, and it preserves and enforces community values rather than the view of the strongest people or the people who can enforce their views. This protects the disadvantage, prevents the misuse of power, and stabilizes the economy. So there are, while we might at times, have a go at the law and some of the negative elements of the law, it does an enormous amount of good in terms of the way we live and the societal structure that we have. Now, of course, in business, there's lots of specific examples. Contract law, tax law, work health and safety, anti-discrimination, industrial relations, consumer law. All of these things are helping us, maintain social order, preserving and enforcing community values, protecting the disadvantaged, stabilizing the economy, you could say, has all of them help in that, preventing the misuse of power, industrial relations, anti-discrimination, etc. So what we can see is these principles are put in place in various elements of business law. As we mentioned, laws can need to change, and ideally they'll be flexible. Why will they change? They'll change as we have changing community values that get reflected in political change. The law should recognise problems as they arise. So a law may create some problems, so it needs to change and be flexible so that we get rid of that problem as much as possible. Laws can change because of particular lobby groups, which can be good or bad depending on your point of view about those lobby groups. And of course, the law can change for technology. So there's lots of reasons why the law changes, and a good law will be flexible enough to change to reflect the changing society we live in. So that gives us a bit of a sense about what is law and what's it doing and what is the attributes of good law. In the next video, we're going to start looking at classification systems for law, and we'll do that in a separate video so that you can concentrate on these classifications once you've got the idea about what a good legal system is, no matter what the classification system we're talking about. Okay.